So let's jump to our next story, which is a very fucking interesting story. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We have arrived. What the fuck am I talking about? We have arrived at a very, very critical moment in this whole streaming war situation, this whole theaters being viable scenario. Oh, we have gotten to a point that is a turning point. Um, so, as you know, there's been sort of this, or maybe you don't know, I have no idea, but there's been sort of this sort of swell for, hey, why don't we just change over to basically everything going to video on demand? Like, we're in this coronavirus era where it's questionable whether you should go out and do shit. And even after right now we're entering a new phase where now we're starting to open things back up, and but people are still a little skeptical. Like, hey, should we still kind of take it easy and not be in a rush to go back out there? So there's this swell of, hey, why don't we just not have theatrical releases, but release everything VOD, or possibly do both, right? Release movies in theaters as well as releasing them on demand, right? So you could just watch them at home as soon as they come out. Um, and I remember AMC, right? It was a big thing that they basically chastised Universal.
Yep.
Don't you do it? Don't you release these things on demand and try to release them in theaters as well?
And
Otherwise,
that's
we'll
when
fuck your shit.
that's when Universal had released Trolls
Trolls, yeah,
on
Trolls
demand.
2, yeah, or
Big film.
Trolls
Yep.
Worldwide
Tr
Tour, whatever the fuck it's called.
Worldwide tour.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I'm actually going to reference that a little later on when we get to it. But we've arrived at this very fucking interesting moment, because at first it was like, oh, AMC got out there, and then Regal got out there and were like, man, don't do that fuck shit of releasing shit on demand. And my question at the time was, okay, you can say that's a Universal because all they've really got is what, Fast and Furious, and you're like, look, I can do without a Fast and Furious 9 or
Yeah.
whatever the fuck number they're at.
And they had James Bond, right?
No, Universal does not have Bond. That is, I think that's still MGM as well as I want to say Sony, but that might be wrong too. But I definitely don't think it's Universal. But anyways, uh, but my question at the time was, okay, but what if you get one of the big dogs, and Universal clearly is a big dog, but what if you get one of the bigger dogs to come out and say, yeah, we might do this whole video on demand thing? And I was like, what if Disney came out and said it? And sure as fuck, here we are. We got word this past week. This comes to us from Deadline. I'll just read to you some of the article here. Disney may opt to kill the theatrical release run for Mulan, according to Wall Street analyst Michael Nathanson. Mulan, a big budget live action remake of the Disney animated film, is a looming issue for the company, which took in 13 billion in global box office in 2019. If the film collects even 50% of the 1 billion many recent Disney tentpole films have, it will be a freaking home run, says Nathanson. So basically, like, the summary of the thing that he's trying to say here is that it actually would benefit Disney right now, actually, if they did release Mulan on demand versus having it released in theaters, because in theaters you'd have to expect that there's going to be a tempered expectation for the film, right? That the film's just not going to do as well as it would have done if it, didn't have coronavirus and half the fucking world was on fire right now. And so he says that it would actually be a benefit to their stock if, and that's what all these companies are about, is about measuring their stock and, what's going on with that. But what if they announce that, hey, we're going to release this on demand, and then that would create excitement around, oh shit, Disney's doing something a little different. They're taking a new avenue, trying to prepare for life after COVID, and that might help them out financially, maybe more in the short term than in the long run, but who knows? It might actually help him out long term as well. So yeah, and then and what he says is that they essentially use Trolls World Tour as sort of a precedent for, oh hey, you have this release that we're going to release on demand, and it can still do very well, and you think, and what has always been my the thing that I've always sort of maintained is that, okay, Trolls World Tour, nobody really gives a shit about that, right? I'm sure some family people want to watch that. Great. But what happens when you take one of the biggest films of to be released, a big budget film that is one of the tentpole films, and you release that on demand? Well, now we're at a point of no return. Now it's not about, oh, should everything be on demand? Now it's a matter of, when is everybody going to make their shit available on demand, instead of just doing a theatrical run? Not saying that it's not going to be in theaters, but that they're also going to release it on demand. If Mulan gets, make no mistake about this, hear me now, quote me later. If Mulan gets released on demand,
Movie theaters are
it's a
done.
wrap. It's a fucking wrap, dude. Like,
Close up shop.
and say one more time.
And I was gonna say they're gonna have to start closing up shop, start leasing
Well,
like.
so the thing is, I don't think they would actually have to close up shop necessarily. Not necessarily, because we just got like we just got news that Amazon's actually looking into buying like AMC, for instance, right? What I think might happen is that they might get bought out, but they're going to have to change their model of how they think of releases. They're going to have to, in order to be even remotely a viable operation, right? That if all of these, and make no mistake, as soon as Disney does this, which Disney is arguably the biggest, not arguably, definitely the biggest film studio right now in the world. If they release their film online, everybody else is going to do the same eventually, right? They're just going to have to,
Yeah.
in order to keep pace.
So there's definitely going to be a domino effect here. I mean, if Disney releases Mulan on VOD, then I think what happens next is like Black Widow gets released on VOD, Wonder Woman gets released on VOD, No Time to Die, the next Bond film, which I think they pushed back to November.
Yeah.
It gets released on VOD. They may even be able to bump that up, right, and release it sooner. And to your point, the movie theaters are going to have to change their model. They're going to have to change the nature of their business. They're going to have to really go back to the drawing board and think like, how do we survive? Right, survive first, and then like, all right, now can this new model thrive? And then you got players coming in like Amazon that's like thinking of buying AMC. Like if you know if you're really concerned with like the investors, right? Investors are probably like, hey, like do whatever the fuck we need to do to get my money back to where it used to be, right? So maybe selling to Amazon is the best bet. But then if you sell to Amazon, how does that change the nature of the industry when you look at like films coming out of Disney and all these other distribution and production studios, right? If Amazon owns one of the biggest movie theater chains, so it's going to be a really interesting domino effect. We got to see like where the dominoes fall, but I think Disney has on Disney Plus, right? They have the platform and they have the subscribers.
It actually makes perfect fucking sense for them to do it, right? Like, in terms of, it's one of their biggest releases of the year. They are wholly unsure what the film's going to do in theaters if they release it in theaters right now. And then on top of that, again, they have kind of a little bit of a precedent with Trolls World Tour. Of course, it's a different vibe, right? Like, Trolls World Tour doesn't really compare to like a live action Mulan movie, right? They're not the same thing, but at the same time, there's at least something to say that, hey, there might be success here. The time has never been better for them to experiment with this. And trust me when I say, like I said, if they release Mulan on demand versus maybe they release it at the same time that they release it in theaters, this whole conversation is over. Yeah, about if this is going to happen. But yeah, I think that this is one of those moments that's like, okay, this is it. This is the moment that everybody's been sort of anticipating might happen. And if this goes down that way, yeah, we're looking at a completely different landscape.
Yeah, and I think like with like video on demand, Disney could do some really cool things here. They could have like a back-to-back showing, right? Like if you order the Mulan, the newest Mulan film, like you'll watch the original Mulan film, and then that will like lead right into like the launch of the newest Mulan film. Like they can package it up really neatly. You can tie merchandise to it. They can do a lot of different things with like a digital release than they would be able to do in movie theaters. Yeah. And they're not having to share that revenue with the theaters.
Yeah, well, that's what theaters are clearly going to hate. But it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, right? In terms of having the movie theaters start thinking a lot more out of the box as far as like how they can start adapting to sort of the changing circumstance. And one of the brilliant things that you brought up was perhaps they should do things like partner up with like maybe Uber or
like DoorDash or
DoorDash
Grubhub.
or Grubhub, things like that, in order to create this more immersive experience from your home, right? So like if you ordered Mulan through like let's say AMC's app, right, you would not only get the on-demand movie that you can watch at home, but then you can also order food and then it'll arrive, and then they can just like build an entire thing around it. But they have to start doing something because it's not a question of if this will happen, it's a question of when it's going to happen, right? Like I love going to the theaters, right? But I'm not blind to the fact that like sometimes for depending on the movie, I don't want to go to a movie. I would be perfectly fine sitting on my ass on my couch watching the movie on my TV, right? So
Yeah, I mean, and here's one of the biggest changes I think for a lot of people, right? Like going to the movies was an experience, but like let's say you take a girl out to the movies on a date, right? The time from the time from like the movie ending to getting her back to your place was always very difficult. A lot could happen in that time. She could want to go home, but if she's already at the crib, then
Yo, Jesus. All right. we'll breeze past that. This is a somewhat of a family-friendly podcast, I think. Just kidding. We never claim to be anything of such.
Waiting for you to catch on to see what you'd be like. Holy shit, what does he say?
Mute him. But yeah, but this is huge news, and it doesn't. It's right now. I think it's like the biggest story right now as far as the fate of the theaters, right? Yeah, I can't. And again, because of the position that Disney's sitting in terms of like, look, they've got a lot of shit to worry about, right? Like they've got their theme parks that they're clearly losing a shit ton of money, and they will probably continue to lose money on their theme parks because they're not going to be like, just because shit is opening back up doesn't mean that they're going to be able to go to full capacity with their parks and shit. And their experience, the whole thing that they've built is like the live in-person experience, right? And what happens when they're no longer able to do that? They're going to have to find out different ways to maximize whatever revenues that they've got coming in. So perhaps releasing Mulan in theaters when it's questionable about if it's going to do any numbers might be at least one avenue of doing that. So yeah, I'm with no pun intended, except for all the pun isn't actually intended. I'm going to be sitting back with popcorn, watching what the fuck goes on in this scenario because it's very fucking interesting what's going to happen. And I'll even throw this in as well. Coronavirus has reset the market when it comes to film releases. Like no more, especially in theaters, are we thinking about billion-dollar films? At least for like the next few years. There's not going to be another billion-dollar film. I guarantee you that's true in its entirety.
Luckily, James Cameron already has like that investment, right?
No. I don't mean how much it's going to cost. I mean how much it's going to make
revenue.
Yeah. So
yeah,
there's going to be a long time before we see that, and if there's not, maybe everything goes back to normal, and they whether it's Mulan, Tenet, or whatever, or maybe even one of the Avatar films once they drop, maybe they might make a Billy, but I fucking doubt it. I'd
be surprised.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our final.